What is exposure therapy and why does it work? Stay tuned. If you have an irrational fear of chickens that has reached the point that it's interfering with your daily life, it's only natural and smart that you might seek treatment for that problem. However, you might not think so once your doctor recommends exposure therapy, where they want to systematically expose you to chickens of every type and in every situation. It seems like a bad idea. Isn't it cruel to intentionally expose someone to the thing that they fear the most to the point that it's causing them significant distress in their lives? Well, the answer lies in how fears are learned and how they are unlearned or extinguished. I use fear as a jumping off point, but exposure therapies are used for a wide variety of conditions, including fears, anxiety, PTSD, body image disorders, among others. Fear is one of the most well-understood emotions and most well-understood types of learning. In the laboratory, you can train not only people, but also non-humans to fear a target stimulus. The classic example, and this will show you how far the science of fear goes back, is John B. Watson's famous Little Albert experiment, which was published in 1920. In that classic study, which is covered in every introductory psych textbook ever since then, Watson and his graduate student Rosalie Rayner trained a baby just under 1 year old to fear a furry white rat. Each time they presented the rat, and baby Albert reached out to touch it, they would bang a steel bar with a hammer behind his head to create a loud noise. Now, of course, there are a number of ethical issues with this study, but also this experiment has taken on a life of its own where it's been repeated and used for different purposes at different times in history, changing the overall you know what? This sounds like another video that gets into these details. Subscribe if you want me to fall down that rabbit hole and share it with you. Anyway. In animals like rats, you can teach fear too. It usually begins with a training phase called acquisition, in which the fear is trained or acquired via classical conditioning. Often there's a stimulus that serves as the cue that is to be learned about, such as a tone or maybe even just the conditioning box itself, which psychologists would call a context. If you're at all studied up on your classical conditioning, this stimulus is the conditioned stimulus, or CS. By itself, the CS doesn't mean anything to the animal, so it doesn't predict behavior on its own. However, if you start pairing that CS with an unconditioned stimulus, or US, in the case of fear conditioning, this is usually an electric shock, the animal will start to learn that the CS and the US are connected or associated with each other in some way. Psychologists call this connection that is learned an association. Now, you keep doing this, pairing of the tone with a shock, the CS with the US, and pretty soon the tone by itself will start inducing fear. In the case of rodents, fear shows up as freezing, as if to keep still and avoid detection from predators. Congratulations, you've trained a fear. It turns out that many fears, phobias, and anxiety-related conditions such as PTSD start in a similar way, by learning to associate stimuli with bad things, which then triggers an emotional response. There's also an accompanying cascade of physiological changes, such as an increase in stress hormones, activation of the opioid system to compensate for pain, and on and on. The learning of fears can happen naturally because we are built to pay attention to all kinds of stimuli when emotionally charged events happen. So, now that we have the fear, how do we get rid of it? After all, this video is supposed to be about reducing fears, not increasing them. Well, the acquisition phase gave us the fear, but to get rid of it, we move on to a phase called extinction, where we will extinguish the learned fear. To do this, we present the conditioned stimulus, or CS, by itself, so that the animal can now learn that the CS no longer predicts bad things. So I may present the tone a bunch of times, beep, 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 and at first I'm going to get a lot of fear and a lot of freezing. The animal will be scared at first and start those physiological changes I was talking about earlier. However, over time, the animal will start to learn that it's wasting precious energy in stress mode since this no longer predicts shock. Slowly but surely, the stimulus will stop eliciting a fear response. So now, what does this have to do with exposure therapy? Why does exposure therapy work? Well, the idea is to expose the fear-inducing stimuli, the CS, in a safe place where there is no risk, danger, or painful unconditioned stimuli. This results in extinction of the fear eventually. There are a couple of key elements that have to be in place for it to work, however. First is something called violation of expectations. Research shows that more learning happens when you experience something unexpected. In this case, the emotions of fear or anxiety you feel in your body cause you to anticipate a bad outcome. To violate these expectations, it's important to be exposed to that fear-inducing stimulus long enough that you can be sure that the bad thing didn't happen. On the other hand, if you stop the exposure too soon, then the training could actually backfire in that you got the anxiety or the fear, but escaping from that stimulus sends a signal, whew, I got away. Thank goodness for those fear signals. And if that happens, that's only going to maintain the problem, not get rid of it. Another thing you have to do is get rid of any safety signals that might also be learned about during extinction or exposure. For example, if you're afraid of spiders and I sit beside you while you sit next to my pet spider Becky, you might not learn that spiders are nothing to fear, but instead you might learn that while this guy is around, a spider in this enclosure is nothing to fear. That means you might not be afraid of Becky, but it's also not going to help you in general out in the real world. This leads to our third element for success, extinction in multiple contexts. It's a good idea to practice exposure in lots of different places and situations, which will ensure that the extinction of fear will generalize. Now, generalization is the term we use to describe when learning is applied to lots of different situations and lots of different stimuli, as opposed to discrimination, where the learning applies to just one stimulus or context. In other words, you need to take Becky to the movies, see Becky at dinner, bring Becky to your parents' house. Wait, are you and Becky dating? These are just some of the ways that you can enhance exposure therapy. I'll leave a reference to a paper that discusses these and a few more strategies for success if you're interested. But basically, exposure therapy works through extinction of the fear by exposure to the fear-inducing stimulus without anything bad happening other than the fear or anxiety itself. If you found this video useful, hit the like button, consider subscribing to help us grow our channel and spread psychology to everyone. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep thinking. Friends, family, we're gathered here today to unite these two in the holy bonds of matrimony. Do we have the rings? Becky, do you take this